Well, good morning. It's not quite 9 o'clock. I'm just turning on the webinar. We'll let everybody get signed in and we'll get started here in just a minute or two. Well, I think a lot of people have signed in and still see a few people coming in. So we'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Just while people are signing in, I see one hand up. Curtis, do you want to type your question into the question and answer panel? That's what we'll be trying to use for questions. Well, everybody, let's get started. Welcome to our the fall update for the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment. My name is Paul Knowles. For those of you that don't know me, I've been involved in the Class EA for many years, right back into the late 80s and through my career when I spent most of it with the town of Carleton Place. I was on the MEA's committee that dealt with the Class EA. And then the last few years since I've retired, I've been employed by MEA to provide training and represent the Municipal Engineers Association during our dealings with the ministry to get it amended. So well, it's been busy sometimes during the last few years. The topics today are really just going to focus on two things that we really want to get the word out about. The proper classification and reporting of projects, and then interpreting and administering the Class EA. So I'll go through a bit of a presentation and then we'll pause for questions at the end of each of these two sections. So there should be some time for questions on either one. So the first thing we'll talk about is just how to classify and how to report projects. Everybody knows about reporting your project. The notice of commencement has to go to the ministry. This is discussed in section 8.1.5.1. And all Schedule B and C projects must be reported to the ministries. You have to send them your notice of commencement. Now, Schedule A plus projects are really not to be reported because they're exempt. They're not part of the Class EA system. So because they're not part of the system, they shouldn't be reported with these forms. However, if your project it ended up a Schedule A, there's recall there's 18 projects that start off as a B or a C, and if you do the archaeological screening process, you can reclassify it as A plus. So those projects that follow the archaeological screening process to become exempt, they are Schedule B or C projects that are to be reported, and you should report that you shifted them to be exempt and report them as Schedule A plus. So if the only Schedule A plus projects that would get reported with that form are the ones that were originally or really are designated B or C, but you followed the process to get out of that. So why are Schedule A plus exempt? And I'll take you back to the act that was passed in 2019, the More Homes, More Choice Act. And previous to that act, Scheduling A plus projects were called pre-approved. And you may have heard this, but the act changed that. Instead of being pre-approved, they're exempt. And if they're exempt, the act just cannot apply. So they cannot be elevated to a Schedule B or C. There's no Part 2 order request or no Section 16 orders possible. And the public notice requirements for the Class EA system just doesn't apply to Schedule A and A plus projects. And this was done, well, really the act changed in 2019. Ministry hasn't done a real good job. Well, they really haven't done anything to publicize this fact is one of the problems. Municipal engineers didn't really find out about this kind of subtle legal change for quite some time. And then when the amendment happened this past March, if you look at section A 8.1.2.2, the ministry changed the words in here, and you can see at the bottom it talks about for Schedule B projects, the proponent may have discretion to decide to carry out a Schedule C project. For Schedule C, proponent may decide to carry out an individual EA. Proponents of exempted projects may decide to carry out an EA-like process outside the EA Act regime. So the ministry invented this term EA-like process and put it in the amended Class EA that we all saw this past March. So just to illustrate it graphically, so everybody's familiar, we have these 4 classifications of projects increasing in level of complexity from A through to C. The B's can be elevated, the C's can be elevated. Exempted projects, they can't be elevated, but in fact, MEA encourages people to undertake this EA-like process for appropriate projects. So we do this, try and do this update every fall. And what happens on an annual basis is the Municipal Engineers Association is tasked with monitoring the use of the Class EA and submitting a report to the ministry every October 4th. So we look at various things, and one of the things we look at is the spreadsheet. All of your notice commencements that get sent into the ministry. The ministry, of course, puts that information in a spreadsheet, and then we get a copy from the ministry, and we can look and see how many projects are going on, what's happening. So you can see here in the last few years, there's been 170, 180, 244. That's the number of kind of active Class EA projects there are. And you can see how many are the Schedule A plus, B, and C, and master plans. Fair number of master plans. But when I actually start looking at the detail of the spreadsheet, and you see there's 7 Schedule A road projects this past year, and you start reading the titles of them, they're not really projects that should be in there. So when we looked at this in 2002, we noticed it appears there's 27 projects that could likely be exempted. Now, you know, we don't have all the information. There could be something misleading about the title. There could be something that some detail of the project that's driving it. But it looked like there was around 27 projects that really shouldn't be reported because they're exempted. They're exempted. And we said, well, we should educate people, and we built this into our education program or to try and get the word out. But in 2023, when we reviewed this spreadsheet, we saw 54 projects. So apparently our word isn't getting out. And so many of you maybe have signed up for this webinar because we sent out emails to all proponents. But here we have a list of 244 active projects with the contact. We'll at least let all these people know, not that most of the projects are quite properly classified, but we just wanted to send a blanket email to everybody to point out this is an issue in some cases, and just be aware. So we sent out that email maybe a month ago, and then invited you to, if you had questions, to sign up for today's session. So just some of the examples of titles that we saw that really didn't seem to fit within the Class EA were Parks and Recreation Master Plan and Update and Enjoyment Strategy. There was expanding a dock facility, a transmission line on St. Clair, geomorphic system master plan, wharf improvements. Like Class EA deals with transit, water, wastewater, and roads. So these projects just don't fall within the Class EA. So, you know, there are again some projects that do fall within, but you know, really are likely to be exempt are the consolidated operations and maintenance facility, for example. Well, if you look at A and B together, or 11A and 11B here, the expansions, improvements, establishing a new patrol yard, maintenance facilities, they're all covered as Schedule A plus. So I can't quite see why. Again, we didn't look at the detail. Maybe the project has something else driving it, but it appears that this is improperly classified as a B or C. It should be an A plus. Parking lot expansion. So in the Class EA, construction of new parking lots not associated with the building less than $12 million are Schedule A plus. And so when I look at a relatively small municipality constructing a parking lot, I can't imagine it exceeding $12 million. So therefore it's a Schedule A plus. And maybe this would be a good time to mention, somebody might say, well, what about the fact that it's a parking lot at a boat launch? It's down right along the river. Well, the clause doesn't have any qualifiers about that. This is exempt, and that doesn't change the category. And the example I'll give is many years ago, um, in the 90s, traffic calming used to be classified as a Schedule B project. And then when we created Schedule A plus, we moved traffic calming into that. But the ministry actually lobbied, and Toronto, the city of Toronto, lobbied the ministry and had the ministry actually exempt it from the act. So it was exempted from the act, and that means that no matter how much community input there is or impact there is, it's outside the act, and you cannot apply the act to it. You're welcome to do an EA-like process, and in fact, MEA encourages that. But there's no conditions there about, oh, there's a lot of community impact or a lot of potential for impact. There's nothing that overrides the exempt. It's exempted regardless of that. Another one, a municipal storage, snow storage facility is not included in the Class EA. It talks about salt storage, but it doesn't talk about snow storage. And we don't feel that's part of the Class EA, again, using the EA-like process. Bridge removal, road closures, these are covered as Schedule A plus projects. Again, they could be very, closing a street downtown and converting it into a pedestrian way, for example, could be very controversial and of course, lots of community input, but it's not a Schedule B or C. Downtown streetscaping, same thing. It's pretty clearly a Schedule A plus. It's either streetscaping under this or reconstruction where you're not increasing traffic lanes. So that here we note that road diets are considered A plus. Traffic calming projects are specifically exempted right in the act. Intersection improvements. Many of these are exempted, and here you really have to get into the detail. Is there property acquisition involved, and how much? And so there's a potential. So there's, if you're dealing with an intersection improvement, it's possible that it is designated B or C, but there's a good chance it's not. You'd have to look into the detail of it. And the same applies for pumping stations. This is an area that changed, that a number of pumping stations could now be A plus instead of B or C, but not always, and you need to look into the detail. So what is an EA-like process? The ministry kind of invented this term and didn't really, so there's no associated explanation in the glossary. Really, it's projects, you can follow the process of a Class EA without using the words. That's essentially it. But so I pulled like a couple of these slides from earlier presentations that quite a while ago, before the act even changed. And MEA's always encouraged proponents to match the level of complexity of the project with the level of effort for consultation. And if you look and you see, would the community benefit from more opportunity for public engagement than the minimum that's required, then you should do that. And you can do it outside an EA process. It doesn't have to be by elevator. And one example of this is again, quite a number of years ago, a municipality was undertaking a streetscaping project in their downtown, and they elevated, it's an A+ project, but they elevated it as, as you were allowed to do at that time, to Schedule C. And they did lots of consultation, had the community, they did a very good job on the project. But in the end, one of the commercial businesses was losing the on-street parking in front of their business was being removed, and they submitted a part to order request, which held up the project for 2 years. Well, I think the better approach would have been, even at that time, they should not have elevated to C. They should have just done all that consultation outside of the EA regime and not have the ability to hold up the project, waiting on a decision from a part to order. So this is an old slide from a number of years ago. It is just seen as relevant. The same, the act just the change in the act just makes it more relevant. So again, if the community would benefit from very detailed consideration alternatives, then do that, and don't follow the other steps that aren't beneficial. If you want to make sure you have a thoroughly documented preferred solution and the associated mitigating measures, then write a report or a memo or some sort of documentation, but it doesn't have to be in an ESR. So some sample projects that are in Schedule A+ are things like resurfacing streets, new fences, new retaining walls, traffic control. Things like this really just need some notice. And so again, these are old slides, but I think they're still relevant. So here you are, you're going to put a fence along a road, on people's backyards, and you're notifying them when the work's going to begin and who they should contact if they have any questions. So that's you're done your Class EA process with that notification. You may have some other projects that are you want to be a little more than just notifying. You want to perhaps have some input, so you could follow, generally speaking, the process and think about who are your stakeholders, how are you going to contact them, what's your level of consultation. So you could have an open house, and you're going to contact them in the fall, and then you're going to do the design over the winter and present the final design to council for approval, have an open house. So you can do all that outside the EA regime. You can have a notice that looks something like an EA notice, but it just doesn't mention anything about the EA Act. And again, you could have a fairly complex project like reconstructing that main street that we talk about the example. You have lots of input, lots of ways to contact the people, have several open houses, and individual meetings, third open house, final report to council. Again, you can send out notices that look an awful lot like an EA process, but it is not following the EA Act. The legislative municipal Class EA is just a municipality consulting with its stakeholders. So those are just some samples. So any questions related to that? I see some questions here that I'll go over and have a look at now. We have recently received letters from Indigenous groups after receiving the notice of commencement and notice of PCA stating this is not considered engagement that to properly engage them, we need to fill out an application form, pay a review fee, and then enter a payment agreement for review. What are our obligations? I think we're going to cover that topic a bit anyway in the session tomorrow. That talks about what we're going to talk about Part A. Why do you keep referring to projects as Schedule A plus? I thought the category was replaced with exempt. Technically that's correct. The ministry just considers either B or C are exempt. Um, Municipal engineers maintains the category, and we're still talking about A and A plus because it's our advice that the projects that we designate as A plus should have notice to your public, and if they're Schedule A, you shouldn't bother. So that's our advice. This is all outside the act. You're not under it. Technically, from the ministry's perspective, they're not part of the EA regime. Can you explain why geometric system master plans are not covered? I admit that I am not that familiar with them. They just seemed like something that wasn't related to transit, roads, or water, wastewater. But if they are, then I guess they are. The deck on PDF format would be convenient for filing purposes. Okay, yeah. I guess, yeah, we can convert that. Is there any requirement to notify a Schedule A plus project? They are now totally exempt. Legally, no, there is no obligation. The ministry, it's outside the ministry's authority. This is MEA's advice to proponents that they should be responsible, and then you should notify on these, but it is just advice. MEA is not a legislative body. So parking master plan study, what classification EA would it be? I would assume it would likely be an A plus. I mean, the end result is building parking lots that likely cost less than $12 million each. I, so you can do a study without following, being inside the EA. Is there a link to be added to the mailing list? I'm not sure. Is the monitoring report made publicly available? Yes, the monitoring report is available. It's on the municipal Class EA website. And there's the past ones, they're all there for every year. I'm not sure about, is there a link to be added to the mailing list? I don't know. Don't understand the question. Perhaps you could clarify that one. That's all the questions I see at the moment. So we'll carry on to our kind of second topic. And this is really about administering and following the act and the responsibilities of compliance. Now, the proponent is responsible to be compliant with the act, and the proponent determines the schedule. Proponents welcome to ask MEA, and we get that through some requests on an ongoing basis. You might consult your solicitor. You can talk to the ministry because there are sometimes projects don't fall exactly within the wording, and there has to be some room for interpretations. But what we're cautious about is if there's going to be some interpretation or clarification, we want to make sure MEA is involved in that. What's kind of driving this whole topic for us is we've got a couple of examples where a ministry staff has told a individual municipality, well, you know, that project should be a Schedule B or should be a Schedule C. And but we don't think so. And if it's pretty clear that it's, you know, they're making up an interpretation, well, if the ministry's correct, we need to know, MEA needs to understand that so that we can either adjust our training um, or they're telling people what isn't correct. So anyway, the important roles, the project proponents, the ministry, and the MEA all have important roles. So the project proponents, and this is generally municipalities, there can be other proponents, you know, you're responsible for complying with the act and following the process. Now, the ministry has a number of roles. So they're the police. They're responsible for compliance and enforcement. You know, it's the regulator, the ministry. They can review what you've done and review it at any point in time. And if they decide that you've not followed the act and not classify, and one way you could not follow the act is not to classify a project properly, they can come in. In fact, they could charge you under the act. As far as I'm aware, there's never been a charge. Yeah, I think the ministry would use quite a bit of discretion in how to actually enforce the act, and I'm sure they come down and work with municipalities, and the municipalities are not, you know, interested in purposely breaking the law. So that in 30 years, there's never been an actual charge. But so anyway, that's the ministry's responsibilities. They're the police. I guess even more so that they're above the police, or in addition to being the police, they're also the approval agency. So they write the law and approve the law, and they can amend the law. The minister may amend the Class CA. The ministry just amended it last March for a variety of reasons, and there's a process that the ministry follows, and the minister can approve amendments. The Act provides the authority for the director to make amendments. Now, they're limited to correcting errors that are editorial or typographical in nature, updating references to a guideline, updating references to bodies, offices, persons, and clarifying the existing text of the Class CA. So the director can actually clarify. They have the legal authority to clarify. But I guess what I'd say is, if the ministry is going to exercise that authority and clarify, then it needs to be publicized and apply generally to, if the ministry decides that the wording really means something, you know, that not everybody's aware of, then it should be applied to everybody. You can't just pick out and say, well, in this municipality, this wording means this because it suits what we want to do. But in some other municipality, it's going to mean a different thing. They have to be consistent. And then the ministry has the approvals of, you know, when they issue these amendments, they have to have to think about it covering all situations. You can't go in and say, well, in this example, we want to decide it's classified something because it seems to suit this example. You got to think about how it applies generally across the province. And the ministry also, another role they have is reviewing Section 16 orders and issuing orders when appropriate. Interestingly, there hasn't, since the Act changed, there hasn't been any orders and that's, I guess, good that everything's operating well. So, yeah, so this just describes that when the act changed in July of 2020, um, the order, it's not part two orders anymore, it's section 16. Now, MEA also has responsibilities. One is to monitor the use. So, like I just mentioned, the annual monitoring report is submitted every October. Um, so we need to. That's one of the reasons if there's new interpretations that are going to be applied, we need to know about that and can include that information in our monitoring report. We will then also include it in our training material that we deliver, like today. Um, but we would also, for any interpretations finalized, we want to represent all municipalities. We don't want to see some municipality might be quite fine with some interpretation from the ministry and it might suit their purposes fine, but it might not be generally a wise interpretation that suits all municipalities. So we have to represent those interests, and that's the long and short of this. Is if you run into this situation of you're selecting your schedule, the ministry is coming up with what seems like a new interpretation that's a little odd. Please contact us. That's really the only message we're trying to get out here is contact us so that we can be part of the discussion, and then we can, well, whatever the result is, we can build this into our training material, try and represent the interests of all municipalities. So that's really all I wanted to get out of those two topics. And any questions? Does anybody have any examples of interpretations and questionable? I'll just go over and scroll down the questions and see what people have. MEA asked for 30-day review period prior to the ESR report for non-technical reviewers' comments. MEA had earlier instruction to closely follow the standard review timeline without that additional period. Will this be addressed? We have raised this issue with the ministry of this practice. We don't think it's worthwhile, and we think they should not do that. They do not agree. They feel they have the right, and they feel it's an appropriate thing for them to do. So I'm not sure what, there's nothing written down that says they can ask you to do that, and if you just go ahead, I don't see how they could charge you, but they could be anyway. That's we have agreed. We disagree with the ministry, but they are not prepared to change their mind on that. They defend they feel they have the right to ask for it. I guess you can ask for anything you want. If LID features fall under A+, does that mean there is no requirement to consult on these features if they form a part of a stormwater management strategy to achieve water quality objectives at a city scale? Well, yeah, I guess if you're doing if this is part of some master plan or stormwater master plan, if everything in the project is a Schedule A plus, then it really doesn't fall under the Class EA. You can still do it outside the EA regime. But if you've got some projects in there that don't fall in A plus, that do fall in B or C, that's certainly common. Transportation, sewer, water, any kind of master plan could include, in the sewer and water, it could be a plant upgrade, which is definitely a Schedule C, and all kinds of system improvements, which some of them might be Ds, and many of them would be Schedule A pluses. So you could have uh, all kinds of A pluses with projects, exempted projects that are part of the master plan. If there is a mailing list that notifies members of upcoming webinars, events, and other MEA updates, how do we sign up to be added to the mailing list? Oh, we do not have a mailing list, and that's maybe something we should start. We try and post things on our website, and I guess if you're an MEA member, that's the mailing list we use for upcoming events and webinars is the MEA members mailing list. So every MEA member gets notified. If a Schedule A or A plus are now exempt, are they required to be listed as part of the master plan? Master plan notice of completion typically lists all projects recommended through the master plan. Assume now only B and C need to be listed in the notice. I guess in your notice of completion, your notice of completion should be restricted to the B and Cs, but your master plan, of course, will include lots of A and A plus projects that are just part of the master plan, and the master plan should say these will proceed outside the EA regime, or they're just proceed. So certainly in your master plan, you would identify these projects because they're important, but there would be no notice of completion with them. We're planning a large transportation project assessing the function of 3 major roads. At the minimum, we expect significant intersection improvements, but the project could result in additional through lanes, center lanes, or a combination thereof. It is expected there will be significant land purchases. The projects will also include cycling, pedestrian, which may or may not be associated with a road. Cycling facilities may be built within separate municipal lands that are not adjacent to the road. Standalone active transportation works are likely exempted. However, the road work classifications are uncertain. Can we still plan all of the works through one Class EA, assuming the roadworks end up being a B or C? Yes, you can. Yeah, if you have a project that is, it can be multi. It's a bigger project that involves a number of steps in it. It can still, and it needs to be planned elevated, or not elevated, but it needs to be planned at the highest category of assessment. So if the highest, if this is all tied together as one project, and it's a Schedule C, then the whole project is a Schedule C. Can you please clarify, did Section 16 orders replace Part 2 orders? Yes, they amended the act, and it is now Section 16 instead of Section 2. Can consultants contact the MEA for questions, or is it limited to municipalities? No, we get consultants contact us on a very regular basis. Municipalities are requesting that developers complete an EA for collector roads external to new subdivisions in the secondary planning area. Based on subjective cost estimates for thresholds, developer disagrees and wants to complete design through subdivision planning process. Ultimately, planning approval for this road that engineering felt it was MEA appropriate would MEA weigh in on this. I guess there's actually later today, we're doing a webinar on collector roads and the ministry's new collector road approval screening process. So it would probably address your questions. I don't know how you can, if you're not registered for it, it might be a little late to try and register for it. But that's coming up in, actually, I think it's this morning. Yeah. We completed a Schedule C Class A about 10 years ago. The works included road widening and on-road cycling facilities along with new sidewalks. The works resulted in significant property purchases, and the property has been partially implemented. We're planning on revising the We plan to revise the on-road bike lanes to cycle tracks or some other buffered facility. The ministry has asked about amendment requirements, but their answer was essentially a non-answer. We believe the change from on-road bike lanes to separate facility can be done without adjusting property requirements. We're trying to determine whether a formal EA amendment is required. I guess we've got a section in the webinar tomorrow, part A, that talks about amendments. So I'd encourage you to try and attend that if you can. Any other questions on specifically on these two topics that I can help with today? Well, I'm not seeing any other questions right now. Yeah, you're welcome to submit. Like this last question about the amendment. I think I'd want to, before I responded, we'd want to read that a little more carefully than just answering live. So there's MEA maintains this Ask an Expert. You can go on the website and submit your questions to Ask an Expert, and I guess we'll consult and review things and get back to you. So if I don't see any other questions. Only registration for the seminar tomorrow is closed. Is there any way to register now? I don't know. I'll ask MEA, the staff at MEA about that. Could you briefly describe the new archaeological screening process? Yeah, it's basically poses some questions where you have to assess the likelihood. There's a checklist, and you have to assess the likelihood of impacting archaeological resources. So it's a checklist put out by the Ministry of Multicultural. I forget the name now, but it's a checklist put out with them. So you basically follow this checklist, and then if it recommends hiring an expert, then you have to follow that process and hire the expert. Our project undergoing master plan process is a large stormwater tunnel with many upstream local sewer improvements. The only component that we think falls under Schedule C is the outfall. If we complete the Schedule C requirements, do we have to do it for the outfall component, or the other Schedule B and A plus projects need to be carried with it, or is it evaluated further? Again, it depends on how you're approaching it, and is it all one project which you're grouping together, or is it separate projects as part of the master plan? Again, that would require some thought and more information. So you could either, best to submit that one through the Ask an Expert feature. So this is just a list of all of the seminars that we've had this year and are upcoming. In two more today and two more tomorrow. Something we're pleased to announce is that we've now published a user guide that has some, and you can get to it by either scanning that QR code or by that address that's on the Class CA website, and you can order a copy of it, a paper copy of it. So what it includes is, the stuff we've covered today, the information we're going to cover. We covered last May when we presented stuff. It covers basically all the advice we have related to all of the topics that we're covering in these webinars. So a paper copy of it is now available, and I guess we'd encourage you to, you think that'll be helpful. It's one of the, I think, more helpful parts is we've taken the schedules and expanded it, where we've taken the schedule that the ministry has produced that classifies projects, and we've inserted all kinds of advice into that schedule, so that when you're looking through at the different projects, you can see the advice related to those type of projects, and follow how to best navigate the classification process and how to best proceed.
Paul, Dan Cozy here. If I could just update, perhaps those that are still on the webinar, you could take a screenshot. We realize it's a little difficult to write out that entire link. Maybe take a screenshot of this. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted to the MEA and the MCEA websites. So you could also go back and see this slide when that recording is posted next week. FYI to all MEA members, you will be getting a free digital subscription to the manual that's included with your membership. But we're still working on getting that digital subscription ready. We don't know whether or not we need to comply with AODA guidelines or not. Once we figure that out, we'll have the subscription posted. So MEA members will be able to get the manual, the user guide digitally. It is a copyrighted manual, so we don't expect people to be printing the manual out for themselves. And non-members, you can purchase an annual subscription. We haven't set the price yet, but you could do that as well and have digital access to the manual. But if you're old-fashioned like Paul and I, we recommend you buy the hard copy manual through these two links. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Dan, maybe you can answer. There was a question earlier about, is it too late? Can they sign up for one of the courses that's tomorrow or something? Tomorrow?
Yeah, I responded to that. I wrote the answer. Unfortunately, not. We're not set up to deal with things at the last second. We had provided a significant notice for these other webinars, and unfortunately, we can't accommodate any requests at the last second. Sorry.
Dan, there's another one here. Can I become a member if I'm not a PN but a professional planner?
Well, it's not like we don't like you, but the short answer is no. The MEA bylaw is quite specific. Membership is restricted to professional engineers or engineers in training that are eligible to become PNGs. who are employed by a municipality or work for the provincial or federal government, or if you're a consulting engineer and you are individually designated as the engineer of record for a smaller Ontario municipality, those would get you a membership. Unfortunately, our membership doesn't extend beyond that.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending, and we'll hopefully maybe we'll have not much to report next year because everything's working so well. But we'll see how that goes. So, as I said, if there are specific questions, that's your best approach is to use the Ask an Expert, and then it'll come in and we can review it and get back to you. So thanks very much for attending, and we'll sign off for now.